Hello, everybody. My name is Frank Salvatore. I'm City Councilman here in Danbury, and welcome to Danbury Democrats. Today, we have a very good panel, and I'd like to throw it to a Board of Education member, Kate Conetta, for her introduction.
Hi there. Thanks for having me, Frank. My name is Kate Conetta, and I am the Vice Chair for the Board of Education. And I want to introduce Councilmember Roberto Alves.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Frank, for hosting. My name is Councilman Roberto Alves. I'm excited to be here. And next is Councilman Farley.
Hey, everyone. Great to be here with you. Farley Santos, Councilman representing the 4th Ward.
Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And today, our show is going to be about education and the Danbury Public Schools reopening plan. And so we're going to get right into this today. And the one thing that I wanted to point out is that Councilman Alves, Santos, and I had penned a piece on Sunday, August 9th. And we had stated that our position was that the school should probably go to distance learning. So a lot of the questions today, and we're glad to have Kate Conetta with us, is going to be revolving around that subject. So my first question is going to be to Kate. And Kate, the question is, did the Board of Ed help create the Danbury Public Schools reopening plan?
Before I get started, Frank, I just want to offer a disclaimer. Anything that I'm saying on the show today is, from my personal perspective, it's not as a representative per se of the board. I am really only speaking for myself and my own viewpoints and opinions. With that said, the driving force really came from the state as far as what options were available to us. And in fact, at one point, we didn't even have a hybrid model that was available. The governor was pushing for a full in-person return to school. So there was a concentrated lobbying effort from Danbury and from other districts that felt like this is just not a safe option in order to be able to pursue the option of a hybrid model. So we lobbied really hard with the governor and with the commissioner of education, and they did come back and say, okay, well, it's going to be up to districts to decide whether they go back, full in-person or hybrid. The board's job is really just to, work with the administration and guide the policies that they use. So the planning really came out of the superintendent's office and the administration, and they partnered with us to kind of go over the plan and, to give us an opportunity to voice concerns that we might have or, provide other feedback to the conversation.
Okay. Do you feel that, and I understand the point that the state pretty much handed stuff down and the schools put it together. Do you feel that as a Board of Ed member that you would have liked to have had more be a part of the creation of the plan? Is that something that you feel the board would have liked to have done before approving the plan?
I think the administration really did make a concerted effort to include us. I mean, we had various town halls that were available for the whole public to give feedback on. We were invited to attend those. We were invited to attend staff-specific meetings that were called by the administration. And then we had our own meeting with the administration to talk over these plans. I mean, they really, I think, did a good job communicating there. I mean, as far as being able to dictate what the plan's going to be, everybody that's involved in this is representing the community. I think, there were frustrations on all sides of it, and I'm not sure that I would have been super excited about having to vote on this. I will say that, but I also think that some of the frustrations that we may have experienced as board members might have been alleviated by a vote. So personally, I was glad to let the superintendent make those decisions, because I think it's very easy to get caught up in that idea that more than the experts do sometimes. And, the leadership of our school community is there for a reason. It's because they're there on the front lines and they have a much broader view of everything going on than we do as board members.
Okay. Just a question. Has there been any updated estimates of or actual dollars spent in making our schools COVID ready? I'm sure that the staff has been working very hard to get the schools ready. Has the Board of Ed heard of any estimates and how much is being actually spent to this point? And is there a question if there's enough money to do what they need to do to be ready for the opening September 8th, if I remember correctly?
Sure. Yes, we actually just pushed it back by a week because of the storm. So you're absolutely right. School, the first day for students is going to be September 8th as of right now. There's definitely money that's already been spent. They did show us a spreadsheet with information about the personal protection equipment products that were purchased, whether those were masks, gowns, face shields. I know that they've spent a considerable amount of money on disinfecting materials. Part of the obstacle here, from my perspective, is that the actions that we're taking are largely, around disinfecting and personal protection equipment. Some of the broader things that we could be doing, like spacing out the classrooms or using alternative spaces as classroom space, adding buses to the district's, roster already. Those are things that it would be nice if we could pursue them. And my sense from what I've heard from the administration and what I've heard from our financial department is that it's so far outside the realm of what we can afford right now that we just can't even consider these things that, in my opinion, would make the schools an even safer environment.
I know Councilman Alves and Councilman Santos had an opportunity to visit a couple of our schools this week and have conversations with school administrators. I myself attended one of those tours today. Have the Board of Ed members been invited to take tours of the schools, or have you toured any schools yourself to see the state of readiness?
No, not as of yet. I mean, that's something that I think we would all like to do, but the complication is, when you're bringing folks into a building, you're increasing the risk of, germs coming into the building that you don't want there. Part of the issue here has been, I think, also the time constraints. A lot of the information that came down from the state was delayed. Their plans were supposed to be released a month in advance of when we actually received them. And then, we went back and forth on whether or not we would be allowed to use this hybrid model. So, we're 2 weeks out on, the start of school, and a lot of these plans are just now at the building level being firmed up, for both the teachers that are coming back in for training and, in anticipation for students returning on the 8th.
So let's let the councilman in on this. Don't want you to feel like we're ganging up on the Board of Ed here. So, but
not at all.
Farley and Roberto, I know you guys got to tour some of the schools. I got to tag along with you guys today. What did you find? Can you summarize some of the stuff that you found when you toured the schools?
Well, first of all, going back to our op-ed piece, as parents of children that are in the public school system, we were concerned, right? We saw and we heard of areas that could have been better planned and protected, and so we wanted to step up and be leaders that we were elected to be. Now, what we saw this week in the schools that we toured, I have to say it was a bit worrisome. You're talking about PPEs, programs that haven't been fully in place. We're talking about equipment that's not there yet, including the PPE, stuff that will be ordered for the schools or was ordered. We understand, it's back ordered because every other community in the nation is going through the same thing that we're going. What the best way to summarize this is, I'm glad that my wife and I chose the distance learning program for our daughter. And you had the mayor saying the same thing, that if you had children in the school systems, that's what he would choose. I don't think that's more or less a judgment on the Danbury school system. I think that's more or less where this COVID situation is right now. But you also have to be prepared. As a school district, we need to make sure that we are ready to open our doors and that we are not going to have an issue when we do open our doors for our children to come in now. I know, Kate, your job is a tough one. I served on the Board of Ed for 2 years. I know how tough it is. But I do wish, from what I'm gathering, I've received dozens and dozens of emails from teachers, administrators who are concerned, who are just, they don't feel like the input that they should have had into this situation was they were allowed to give that input. And I do think, that as a board, the board should have been able to vote on this reentry plan. The board should have been able to participate a little further, because we always talked about, my time on the board, we always talked about how the board is there to set policy, right? And I think this reentry plan is a policy. It is what we're going to be working on for this school year. And like we said, it's a health issue. It's an issue of one child coming into a school with a problem that will create a bigger problem. We're not trying to be alarmists. We're just trying to protect our community, that community that we were elected to protect. So, to summarize it, I'm a little worried. I'm worried about this, and I know Roberto shares some of those thoughts. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but Roberto, feel free to elaborate.
Yeah, along with Councilman Santos, when my wife and I had our discussions on what we're going to do with our children, I have a son going into second grade and a daughter who is going to be going into kindergarten. It was a tough decision for us to make, but it was the right decision. We also chose to go with distance learning. And after the tours that we've been on this week, I feel that I made the right decision. Councilman Santos said the same thing. We heard our mayor say that if he was a parent, he would not be sending his children. And we hear that from others as well. I think we would have been in a different place if it came down to a couple things. One of the overarching themes were we just don't have the supplies we were promised. The tentative school start date is 2 weeks from now, September 8th. And you have certain administrators still worried if the supplies are going to get here in time. They're just not ready to open those doors. We see it in our personal lives. Things are back ordered. It's hard to get supplies in. Well, they're going through the same struggles that we are, that other businesses are as well. So are we really ready? And then we're going to talk about this later, or hopefully we do. But, the plans for the school entry from the busing perspective, we're going to have buses full of kids in schools all day. And it comes down to, in my opinion, after a lot of these conversations, and this is an overarching theme of education in Danbury, is funding. It's money. It costs this much money to plan for this. It costs that much money to plan for that. And here we are again in Danbury scrambling for it. Do we have the money to get supplies? We had a CARES Act that was supposed to cover, certain things. Are those funds really helping right now? And Kate, I know Frank will probably throw this back to you, but is that a legitimate concern? If the finances were in a different place, would our opening plan be a little bit better as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think, based on, what you and Farley were saying, that was the first thing that popped into my head. I mean, part of what we're experiencing, and this is not specific to Danbury, this is across the nation. The model for education under the coronavirus situation needs to change in order to really be safe for every kid. I think if you're talking about what they were trying to plan to do, that our administration, I think, is working as hard as they possibly can under the constraints that they've been handed. And part of the complication of, the board stepping in to vote whether or not a plan should go through is that, if we vote no and there's no plan and the schools can't open, you're jeopardizing, the state funding that comes through for the district. You're jeopardizing whether or not the days that we actually go to school, whether those are going to get counted. I know that in New Haven that the board had voted to go to a distance learning program right out of the gate. That's still subject to approval from the Commissioner of Education's office and by the governor. If they don't get that approval, I'm not sure that their days are going to count. And I think that that's the real concern that our administrators are struggling with is, we kind of have to follow the lead that's being given to us or risk, the education process, for our district and risk the funding for our district, which is really important. I mean, we receive a substantial amount of money from the state. And to just say, well, we're just going to do what we think is safest. And don't misunderstand me. I think the priority should be everyone's physical health. I mean, that's the bottom line. There are a lot of issues with reopening the schools. If you decide, okay, we're going to open the windows and the doors for ventilation purposes, well, that kind of flies in the face of all the security measures that we've been taking since Sandy Hook. So, there are all these different interwoven components here, and a lot of it does have to do with money. If our schools were not, at the capacity that they're at now, if we had smaller classroom sizes, if we had additional building space and we could spread out more, and we didn't have situations where classes are already being conducted in, unassigned spaces like the stage or the gym, we would have a little bit more opportunity to create the necessary space to keep kids safer. If we weren't scrambling for funding for staff.
In a follow-up to a comment you brought up, yes, New Haven's Board of Ed was pushing for distance learning, but we know that there hasn't been any approvals yet. But and I know the answer on the surface is I don't know, but do we really think that the state of Connecticut is going to look at New Haven and then say, hey, your days didn't count because you did what you thought was best for your community's health? Do we really think that's going to happen? And that's where I applaud their Board of Ed for taking a different approach. And every community is different. I understand in Danbury where it's very different than New Haven, but they were out and vocal because they saw what the constraints were. Where a lot of us saw as well, and why we penned our op-ed, why we called and try to set up tours to see the schools to make sure what we're seeing and writing and hearing is really what's going on. And rest assured, I feel like I made the right decision after touring these schools. I don't think we are ready yet, but they're doing everything they can. If all the supplies come in, it can be a different story 2 weeks out. And on top of that, and Frank, I'm going to go, I'll stop after I say this and throw it back to you. You're the numbers guy. The numbers are going in the wrong direction.
Well, you knew exactly where I was going to go with this, because I'll tell you one thing, Kate, the one thing I'm concerned about is whoever has to make these decisions. I mean, following the state's guidance, which basically came from a Harvard Institute document for bringing schools back in. If you look at it, the city of Danbury was rolling along nicely, actually in the guidance level that would have allowed in-person instruction. But quickly, we entered the hybrid model area, which is, let's call that the orange zone before we get to the red zone. But we quickly come to the top of the moderate infection in the community, and we're coming close to high community infection. So from a medical perspective, I know when we penned that op-ed, I mean, that was a lot of my worry, and I can't even imagine. And don't get me wrong, I know all these administrators for the Danbury Public Schools, I know the Board of Education, I know the mayor of the city of Danbury, all are doing the best they can in looking in their crystal ball. And that's what it comes down to, is you have to look into a crystal ball and say, okay, these numbers are going in near the red zone. But do we make some changes community-wide and hopefully it comes back down so we stay on course? Or do we just let it ride? Yeah. And let it ride could be an issue. So I tell you that the decision is a tough one, but from a medical standpoint, and I can't even imagine the buses. I mean, I have a niece who's going to be going to the high school, and I know that my brother and sister-in-law are driving her to the high school every day, because by the time that bus gets to the last stop, it's going to be full. They cannot do half full buses. And there's no way that we have the money nor the infrastructure to have two buses on a route. So only 50% of the students can go in one bus versus the other. So it's a big
I 100% Frank. And I think that that's the biggest thing on everybody's mind, because the infection, having an incubation period between, 2 days and 14 days is, who knows what they did 2 weeks ago and who they came in contact with every single moment of the day, especially if you're in a populated environment like a school. One of the criteria from the state that determines what your eligibility is for different phases is what the infection rates are. So as our numbers are starting to creep back up, I know that there's a constant open conversation between our administrative team and the governor's office and the commissioner of education's office, because, you know, even though I think that they're planning the best of their ability right now and working as hard as they can, you know, to make this, you know, a possibility, you know, those concerns are at the forefront of their minds as well. You know, they're speaking with the Department of Health director here in Danbury, and that's a coordinated effort to make sure that if we cross a threshold or even get close to that threshold, that we're going to get consideration for, you know, being able to go to a full distance learning model. I think part of my frustration here is that this chain of events, and I tried to sort of outline that a little bit earlier, this chain of events has been largely driven by the state, and they've delayed, you know, making decisions on these situations because they're complicated. This is a very complicated situation, and there are no solutions that are going to meet the needs of everybody in the community. So it's very difficult to say, you know, this is how we're going to do it. But that's what leadership to me is about, is making a difficult decision, even when you don't have full consensus. And I just think that there's some concern, you know, that there are going to be too many sacrifices, you know, in various parts of the economy and you know, physical health and well-being.
Yeah. You know, Kate, I think you touched on something there that, you know, we must also discuss, which is the fact that, you know, the decisions are coming from the state, right? We understand that we have to follow their guidelines. We have to follow what they're telling us to do. I think for us, it was just a matter of, let's have those conversations. And I know that the administration is having them, but let's advocate for what we think is best.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and when we discussed this, it was data driven. It was driven by other communities that have brought their students in and seeing what the issues are there. And how can we learn from those mistakes and not repeat them? I think that's where we're coming from. And as we look at the recent trend just this week, I mean, today's numbers of infection rate are 30 in Danbury, when about 2 weeks ago we were getting 2, 3, or 1. This last week has been consistently on an incline, and we see why. We see that it's, you know, folks that are socializing more, folks that are not following, you know, the proper guidelines, and then the
coming back from vacation. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. You know, going international travel, national travel. So, you know, we see all those things. And my concern is then we're going to pack our kids into a school bus,
Yep.
different levels, because elementary, middle school, high school. And how is that going that's going to present a challenge for us.
It is. And I think, you know, to that point, Farley, I just would add that, you know, when we talk about infection rates, the infection rate is based on people who are getting tested.
Right.
There's no wide scale testing here. And that makes this a real roll of the dice, because, you know, people do not always self-monitor. There are a lot of people who get this and are asymptomatic and can be spreading it without any awareness.
Correct.
So that's really problematic.
Yep, it is.
I think,
I agree.
And I think the one caveat that I want to make sure, because, you know, I do read the documents from the state, but, you know, the Board of Ed and I believe the public schools have to follow the county statistics, and the county statistics are in the low range for infection spread. And I understand that. And it becomes a little tricky when you want to look at it on a city level. So, you know, we do know that it's happening more and more. It's getting to be more cases are going up, and we're looking at a lot more, you know, a lot more community spread. And so it's making things a little tricky. And so making the decision is going to be one of those tough ones.
Yeah.
I guess at this point in time, we're going to get close to ending the show. So we're going to just have a few minutes to come up with the last few things. So, you know, one of the things that we clearly need to deal with is that the driving force in the positive cases that the mayor has stated have been school aged, and that's why we're concerned. And I think the one thing I can't stress is, you know, we're allowed to have our own opinions, but I think everybody on this show will agree that everybody's trying to do the right thing by the students and the teachers. And Farley, you brought it up that we received quite a few letters from teachers who were very concerned. And even going through the school today, there were questions about readiness.
Right.
There's questions on cleaning bathrooms in between children, and are the schools getting more custodians?
Right.
So the
Lots of
concern,
unanswered questions, right, Frank? That's what
Yeah.
we see. Lots of unanswered questions that really deserve to be planned out. And I think the bottom line from my standpoint was, if we had invested the time to plan for distance learning while creating a very effective plan for bringing them back in, we would have been in a better place.
Yeah, and I think it just, and the thing that everybody has to remember is, I don't have a child in the Danbury Public Schools. I do have a niece in the school. And there's economic reasons why people have to make the decision whether they do distance learning or hybrid learning. And I understand that. And I feel for the parents that have to make the decisions, but we also have to remember the teachers, the custodians, the principals, everybody in the school system itself. And there's a lot of concern going forward here.
And not just the school system, Frank, but also, as you mentioned before, the community at large, because all those kids and all those teachers go home at the end of the day and spend time with their families. And then depending on where their family members are going, that's traveling.
Yeah.
So
listen, in the last 30 seconds here, I want to thank Kate, Farley, and Roberto for doing the Danbury Democrat show with me today. I hope that this spurs on, questions and comments and allows the community to see that there are elected officials out there like us who are having, some concerns. Beto, you have anything? Roberto, you have anything last?
No, we're thank you for scheduling this. We can have this important conversation. We want to keep the conversation going. We want to incorporate as many people from the public, constituents, non-voting members, everybody, to have these conversations with us. You can reach out to us on all our social medias. Our information is public, or you go to the city website, you can find our emails, Board of Education, you can find Kate's email. Please reach out to us. Stay tuned through our social media channels too for other avenues where you can participate in future conversations with us as well. More to come.
Okay, and I'm hearing in my ear we have to wrap it up. So I want to thank everybody for joining us on the Danbury Democrats. Kate, Farley, Roberto, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Frank. Thank you, everyone.